Ladies and gentlemen, stop. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right in that whole predictive manner. And yes, we'll be having Mr. G.R. McGee on to talk about what's going on in his work in relationship to those state conventions and not the state conventions that are being promoted now with the Article 5 nonsense, but with the real ratifying conventions of those first 13 states. And yes, this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I am very delighted to be with you today. This is another exciting time in the midst of all the insanities, and I have to call them what they are. They are insanities that are out there because the people that do not follow and believe truth are really sick in the head. They can't help being sick in the head because they're sick in their spirits. So that's first and foremost, is that they're sick in their spirits. They are walking down that weird and evil path, simply put. And yeah, it makes a big difference. So today in this program, we are definitely going to be talking about some apologies that I'm going to make, as well as some rants that I've heard this week. And maybe I'll have a good rant as well. And reason when that rant and reason can be balanced. But I want to take the next few minutes to really sit back and apologize, in particular to a pastor, John MacArthur. Now, I've mentioned some things about him recently, and there was a time a little over a year ago, especially when he was taking and initially standing up against those shutdowns at his church in Los Angeles, and the way that with wisdom, with truth, and with the tenacity of that truth of the gospel, he has and his church has stood its ground against the lies, deception, the evil of California, and in particular, LA County. Now, we're seeing again that LA County is putting all of these insidious mandates on its citizens. And quite frankly, that is just totally evil in what they're doing. But look who's in control. Look who is in control. So, for Pastor MacArthur, I want to let you know that I do apologize wholeheartedly for some of the rather disparaging words that I may have said in the past programs, and lumped you into a number of those pastors that aren't taking the full biblical stand on society and government. It's been interesting spending time listening to some of the programs that Pastor MacArthur has put out, as well as a number of the different sermons, even going back a few years ago. Now, what I want you to know, Pastor MacArthur, what set my tone in a rather negative way was at one time hearing you speak at Parkside Church in Northeast Ohio. My wife and I have been going back and trying to find that evening that you spoke, so that we're not missing or misinterpreting what you said, but we were very plainly sitting there, and it sounded very much like you were taking the positioning of the senior pastor there at that church, which, yes, he does teach, and so does his staff teach the basics of the gospel. But when it comes into the whole truth, the extensibility, and how to fully live the gospel in every area of a person's life, including self governance, government, culture, and political issues. That particular pastor and his staff uh, are negligent. Let me just put it that way. Now, I did see something recent, and I have to give a pause only because I saw something where I need to go see how he is talking about the masking. And there is a sermon there where he is talking about those that wear a mask and not wear a mask and how to navigate that. So I'm going to go listen to that and see. But from the couple of years sitting under the teaching there, which we have left because he's not reformed, that's for sure. He has a lot of books on the Reformation in their bookstore, but I will fully tell you from listening to him at the pulpit, none of his associate pastors, nor is he preaching anything that I would call foundational Reformation teaching. So, with that is a problem for us, my wife and I. And he is definitely, as I said again, not preaching the full, extensible gospel that touches every aspect of culture, issues, and what it means to even govern. His position has always been give in to the government. So, with that, again, Pastor MacArthur, your sermons have been a delight in going back, and we have seen that you have touched across all aspects of culture, politics, what I call the extensibility of the gospel. Everything down to wait, how do you self govern according to the scriptures? And then what does that mean to interact in your job, interact in society? Um, it's very simple. So, with that, again, I have to confess and apologize in a way that I think people need to pay a little bit more attention to what you're saying, especially in these times when we're seeing the resurgence of the evil in LA, Los Angeles County in particular, as well as California in general, and across the nation with this resurgence of the deception around COVID and the jab. I think that people need to be more highly informed and look forward to hearing more of what is out there. Now, also on today's program and getting into the rants and reason, I'll talk about a little bit in more detail a rant that I listened to by Pastor Doug Wilson. I think it was one of the, as always, I have to stop there because I do think, as always, it was one of his most articulate ways of communicating, both with humor and very poignant punches in the nose. Um, of course, Doug doesn't do that. He doesn't punch in the nose as much as he gets the point across in his Doug way. So it's interesting. But with that, I think that that is a very good rant. More than when we sit back and we look at the rants and the emotional blabber, if you will, of the pundits out there that people are just gravitating to. I, the portion, and I'm stumbling here because I want to try and articulate the right words for you. As you know, I don't necessarily take the time or have the time to sit down and put all of my thoughts in words on paper before these programs. These programs are definitely ad libbed, off the cuff, not wearing any. For those on the radio and the blog, I have no cuffs on, so they're off the cuff, off the top of my head. And guess what? You get to hear the best that I can do with that. But when we look at a lot of these pundits out there that people do gravitate to, again, it's the emotionalism that really draws people in. The speckles of truth that are in there, in many, many ways, have no real context. They don't get down into the nit grit. They don't have a fundamental established undergirding, and that is part of what's problematic in America today. One of the comments that I'll be talking about when we get through the rants and onto the rational is going back into none other than, as I'm holding it up for those that are watching either on Rumble or YouTube, one of my favorite books is the Founders Constitution, put on by Liberty Fund Inc. or Liberty Fund Inc. out of the University of Chicago. And we're going to be delving into Volume 1. Volume 1 is none other than a few pages long here. Let's see if we kind of go back to the end of it a little bit and look at what it's about 700 pages, 712 pages when you include everything. Today I want to talk about the epilogue, because in the epilogue it's referring to securing the republic, and there is a lot of documentation that is there on securing the republic. And I think it's critical that as we move through and finish with the apology portion of the program and a little bit on the rants, and I definitely want to take the last couple minutes here to talk about Pastor Wilson's rant, if you will. But before I go on to his rant, I wanted to kind of go through a rant before the rant. And he has here one of his articles that you'll see is the sickly yellow custard that is a little green around the edges. And he's talking about the vaccine passport defiance. And what does it mean then to defy? What does it mean? And this gets to Christian warfare, Christian defiance. So all that, Pastor MacArthur has been talking about, all that several other what I will call patriot black robe pastors talk about. And in that context, we have to look at how and when do Christians resist. And that's something that I doubt that I'll ever hear from a pastor here in Northeast Ohio that John MacArthur has spoken at his church. But that being said, I think it's important to look at what is it that is being pushed on us, and it's all about control. It's about control. It has nothing to do with reality. So when we take and we look at this, and when we look at what does it mean to push back, and we do that in a true Christian manner, we have to look again, in my opinion, at Magdeburg. We just don't look at what we're seeing now in our present from the likes of either pastors MacArthur or Wilson. So uh, I have to tell you that it's critical that we do understand this, and it's critical that um, people within the church know that they're the ones that should be pushing back very hard. Um, when I look at one of my favorite pastors to observe, and we'll pick it up here because we only have a minute left, is that when I look at one of my historical pastors, I look at Jonas Clark. And we'll talk about Jonas Clark in the opening of the second segment a little bit, because I think that he is a character that understood the full implementation of the gospel in every aspect of life. And historically speaking, he was a friend of Sam Adams, very close friend, and he was related to someone else that we'll talk about in the next segment. So when we look at these things, I also am going to give you a little quote at the opening from none other than a Frenchman that is very interesting. Come on back in the next segment for what we have to say. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti Federalists got it right. This is your host, Tom Navolis, and all of you who know what I usually say in this segment. Yep, I'm going to say it again. Hey, go check out everything on Liberty Works Radio Network and find the donate button. Please, just it's a listener funded network. So do that, find that donate button. And if you think about it, why don't you contact us? Go to the website, samueladamsreturns.net. See what we have going on there. That's where all the program archives are as well. And maybe you can find something that we're doing interesting if you're here in Ohio to help support this ministry. We're not a 501c, we're not tax exempt. So if there is anybody that is out there and listening, and would like to help defer some of the costs that Kath and I just take out of our pocket to make sure that we're able to do what we do, um, contact me, send me an email. Let me know that you're interested in participating in helping us defer some of the costs, and that would be great. But more so, get on Liberty Works Radio Network and find their donate button and definitely contribute to that. So, with that said, let's keep moving on. And oh gosh, there was just so much I wanted to get into, but I wanted to pick up with Jonas Clark. Now, Jonas Clark, really fast. He was just one of those super pastors. He was a mega pastor in everything that I think, and not a mega church pastor. You see, Jonas Clark, he was one of those guys there at Lexington, of all places. Just think about that. And he was the pastor of the church at Lexington. And in being that pastor, he was not rich. By all means, he definitely was not rich. You see, Jonas Clark, he um, he just was one of those guys that money did not come to him. You know how he got paid? Jonas Clark would get, yeah, just some wood. He'd get cords of wood to heat. He'd get chickens. He'd get just a number of different types of support from the community. That was his pay. Not like some pastors in Northeast Ohio that live in $1 million houses and certain things like that. Now, I never just, never feel bad about a pastor gaining, getting paid for what they do. I mean, we're supposed to support them. That's biblically correct. But I'll just leave it at that. Jonas Clark, he also took and rallied the people. He was one that made sure that they not only were taught the biblical truths and what it meant, but in fact, he also helped train the militia there at Lexington. So when the call came out that the Redcoats were coming, it was Jonas Clark that called out the militia there in Lexington to take the field. It was then that because Hancock, which was his cousin, John Hancock, the other famous politician, if you will, or I would say a founder, John Hancock and Sam Adams were staying at Jonas Clark's house the night that the British came to Lexington in that morning. So Jonas Clark was there. He observed the slaughter on Lexington Green. He walked among those that were members of his congregation. He ministered to the dying, the wounded, the families of the dead there. Um, he had strong feelings for everything that was going on. I want to take a moment, which I didn't pull it up in any timely manner, but I'm going to do that. So, my indulgences from you, please, while I take this moment to pull up the book, because I think that it's critical that I read Jonas Clark's prediction as to what he had to say in respect to the whole idea of liberty and what we need. As that is coming into play, I also want to take and read you a quote that we finished up a lecture last night on the Constitution. As you know, I've been lecturing from the Institute on the Constitution, and one of the classes finished up last night. But something that kind of fits together with Jonas Clark, fits together with the epilogue on securing the Republic. This quote from Alex de Tocqueville in 1835, and he was looking at, instead of where we are in America today, so focused on what's going on in Europe culturally, atheistically, politically, all of that. Americans look outside of America more than they pay attention to what it means to self govern inside America. And we'll talk about that in the epilogue, is because of the destruction of our education system. But you know what? Let me have de Tocqueville tell you more about it. De Tocqueville in 1835, after noting American ignorance about European affairs, you getting this? We're ignorant at that time in 1835, could care less about Europe and all of that. But what he goes on to say is that, but if you question the average American respecting his own country, the cloud that dimmed his intelligence will immediately disperse. His language will become as clear and precise as his thoughts. He will inform you what his rights are and by what means he exercises them. He will be able to point out customs which obtain the political world. You will find that he is well acquainted with the rules of the administration and that he is familiar with the mechanisms of the laws. The citizen of the United States does not acquire his practical science and his positive notions from books. The instructions he has acquired may have prepared him for receiving those ideas, but it did not furnish them. The American learns to know the laws by participating in the act of legislation. You got that? And he takes a lesson in the forms of government from governing. Every person from governing. The great work of society is ever going on before his eyes and, as it were, under his hands. What an amazing quote, that we have someone who, when you really take a good hard look at it, clearly understood what it meant to take and observe that Americans were there to govern, to govern. And yet, within that context and understanding that, what happened? Why do we not participate in that self governance any longer? Well, as we've talked about in the classes, and that it's just so much easier to take and push it all off, just to push it off and let the politicians deal with it, let the attorney, let the bureaucrats deal with it. Oh no. Um, wow. What a mess that has taken and put us in because of this sad commentary that we no longer understand how we are to govern. So, anyway, it's all very interesting in that regard. And as things are pulling up, let's go back for a moment to the rant. the rant by none other than Doug Wilson. Now, I um, would have you take and go look at that. It's in the references in relationship to um, the little card, if you will, the sickly custard that's out there and being used and what's being pushed on the whole vaccine. Oh, you only have this card. You can only travel. You can only go to the grocery store now. New York State is implementing this throughout all these insanities, and there's things that we are finding out that none other than grocery stores are now remasking here in Ohio when they're not allowed to. There's no mandate to do that, but these places are just determining on their own that they are going to have people mask up. Now, I'm going to carry with me my Article 1 Bill of Rights from the Ohio Constitution and let them know that they can't do that, that it is our right, that they can't just indiscriminately take and tell us to violate our rights. They are not the state legislature, nor can the governor even do that anymore here in Ohio. So, with that, the interesting blog that is out there in from, as I said, the rant that has gone on by Doug Wilson um, is in your notes, and I would appreciate if you take a look at himself. I'm sorry, it looks like I don't have everything all lined up the way that I was looking to do that, and there is several things that I am missing here, and my great apologies to you for that. But what I will do is make sure that everything is there, and it is. It's all in the references that will help you through what what I missed. So let's take a look, and I'll put that quote there in the references for you as to what happened with Jonas Clark and what he was predicting, because I think it's um, extremely, here we go, important. And here is what Jonas Clark, as I need to scroll down just a little bit more. Thank you for your indulging in your time. You got all this whole story here, and the link is there for you to take a look at what happened during that this piece on him. But what Jonas Clark did say, and his prediction was that there was this prediction that he put out with his dying people were laying there, and he just predicted that there would be a bright morning broke in that whole tranquility, and he talked about all those lifeless forms that were there, and he had no misgivings for, quote, from this day, he said, will be dated the liberty of the world. So he was looking at no different that first shot that rang out there in April, and that there were no sounds, that there was all stillness, but he heard far up in the dome of the universe a bell tolling the knell of tyranny. So that means the fall, the nail in it. And a feeling of exultation filled his bosom in spite of his sympathies and grief, and that he said, fired a volley and gave three cheers. He said, by way of triumph and of exercise of this, the joy and victory and glory of conquest. We need to have that again as we finish up this second segment. We need to understand that there is a joy, there is an exultation when we stand up for righteousness, when we fight for liberty. And even though we stand in the midst of those that are fallen around us, that we know that truth will prevail when God is on our side. Um, we're going to come back in the last segment and go through the epilogue on securing a republic. Go to references for everything else. Sam Adams referenced history a lot. He referenced a number of different foundational truths of that period of time, but most importantly, he referenced the scriptures. He understood the fullness for the extensibility of the gospel, and so should you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti Federalists Got It Right. This is Tom Nivolis, your host, and I am delighted that you are here with me today. I want to welcome back everybody down there in Lima, Ohio with Soaring Eagle Radio. Do appreciate everything that you guys are doing in that area. I know that Dr. Mike Spalding and Kathy are doing a phenomenal job in ministry and are definitely black robe pastor in all that Dr. Mike does. Uh, what I wanted to bring to your attention as I jump back into this segment, I was a little sketchy on it or in the other segment, was that the Doug Wilson rant, the title of that, which is in your notes, is Kicked Out of Hell for Lying. And it's amazing, and what he does bring out that I can't believe it. When I was looking at something a little earlier, is the whole idea that Fauci and crew were sitting there in front of the White House, this gal from the White House, Fauci's there reading different text messages and emails that he's fundamentally making fun of uh, all of us who won't take the jab, who won't mask up, who won't fall into their, I'm just going to call it what it is, their evil. And it comes all down to the epilogue in, as I showed those that are watching on Rumble, and that is none other than, here it is, it's up in front of me again, is the Founders Constitution, Volume 1 out of the several volumes that are there. And the epilogue has a lot of information, and we're going to talk about it with the introduction, but it has definitely letters by a number of different people: James McHenry, James Harrington, Montesquieu, Edmund Burke, George Mason, Sam Adams, John Adams, a couple things on John Adams to Mercy Warren, Garter Braxton, an address to the Convention of the Colony and Ancient Dominion of Virginia, Thomas Jefferson, and then in Richard Henry Lee, Massachusetts Constitution, Sam Adams to John Scully, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson. I mean, there's 36 different references here. So it's important to follow the link that I have up there for you at the archives above my shoulder, samueladamsreturns.net, for those that can't see over my shoulder. You're listening on the podcast, samueladamsreturns.net. Go to today's program, and you will be able to find the appropriate link. Now, the epilogue is Securing the Republic. Now, I will skip through a few things here and read some key points, but it starts out with that question that the lady asked Dr. Franklin at the end of the convention in Philadelphia. And he was asked by this woman, well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? And I know all of you have already said the answer: a republic, if you can keep it. Those are the operative words. And my mom used to say, if stands in a corner stiff. So, if you can keep it. So, one hardly say that the founders were concerned with more than an act of founding, however pressing the difficult that great effort was to be. As men of affairs, they thought of the problems of the morrow, meaning tomorrow, as well. A proper founding implied a proper regard for the principles of preservation. To be sure, the future could not simply be foreseen or foreclosed. The care and thoughtfulness of the past could not render superfluous the care and thoughtfulness of each succeeding living generation, and yet it would be trifling with matter of vast concerns to propose a form of government without giving heed to how it might best be preserved against most likely sources of internal corruption and external danger. It's important to understand that as we look at these internal, what? Internal destruction and corruption, what would preserve it? Well, they get into a lot of interesting discussions here, and as this introduction and the epilogue is brought together, it was all about, yes, let's look at the system of federalism, separation of powers, checks and balances, enumerated powers, secured rights, periodic accountability of officials to the electorate, and the other arrangements that were given in constitutionalism. Its special character were so many barriers against the persistent and predictable forces that might make popular government a hollow or cruel mockery, to which it is right now. One of the things that they did not expect, because the intent was to have small government, was all of these bureaucracies and career bureaucrats. That is part of the internal corruption. We were supposed to have a what? Enumerated, limited powers. So, for that matter, I will say it over and over and over again. The majority of what is in federal government in particular is all unconstitutional. And if we had any elected with intestinal fortitude, they would be getting rid of it. But we don't. They are all gutless, gutless. And it's time that we, the people, follow through on this epilogue, and we say that it's time for any of those that we want to be elected to stand on the foundational truths and the fundamentals by which our constitutional republic was intended and should be preserved. And the first one that needs to go is the Department of Education. That needs to be totally 100% defunded and gotten rid of. And then in every state across this union, education needs to be revamped, and higher education, as I said over and over, needs to be defunded. They're making millions of dollars on the public sector with what they're doing. They're making millions of dollars on sports, and they're making millions of dollars on taking and charging high tuitions, even with being subsidized with your tax dollars. Defund them. If they can't make it on their own, then make them go away. They don't deserve to be corrupting your children, is what they are doing. That's my rant. And I'll continue on it based on this. You see, because as they were going on in this epilogue, it was the idea that governmental institutions could only go so far. While a constitution, it is institutions might elicit and shape certain kinds of conduct. It is also true that a corrupt or slavish people could ruin even a very good constitution. We have that right now. We have a corrupt and slavish people. The mentality of the majority, okay, I'll take that back. There was 87,000 people that voted for Trump. So a good portion of those in government service, especially career bureaucrats, are slavish and are pushing slavery upon us. And they're corrupt. As I have shown, oh, I didn't show you this. Oh, you must go see this. That here in Ohio, that it is very, very interesting that in Ohio, we have a major problem that, my goodness, it's all about the Ohio Republican Party, and that their corruption is that they're already doling out $500,000 to Governor DeSwine, and he's not endorsed. There's no candidate that should be endorsed. And yet, what we have going on is millions of dollars that are going out to a sitting governor who said he wasn't going to run, but now he announces he's going to run. And we have all of this corruption that is out there and bad accounting practices, and on it goes here in the state of Ohio. So when we look at what it means to maintain it, when we have a corrupt and slavish people, it, the best constitution is shot. What really mattered in the last analysis was the kind of people who would make up the American public. Their strengths, their limits were the outer boundaries of what was possible. Civic character of that public was neither a given, fixed beyond the power of statesmen to alter or redirect, nor an infinitely malleable substance to be shaped by institutions at will or whim. That's what we have going on right now. CDC, everything in the administration, even at the state level, is that we have statesmen and institutions that are trying to reform society. You have to read Bastiat. I'll put up that Bastiat, the law, very interesting, and what he predicted and what he said. So, just going on with this alone, it was, after all, for this people in this land that a government was to be founded. American circumstances offered expanded possibilities, to be sure. Thus, Americans could aim at a fuller measure of liberty and self government than others had achieved. But, like Solon, the American founders also knew that circumstances were a powerful restraint on plans and dreams. It was their business to propose not the best that they could imagine, but the best that their people could accept. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the problem right now, is that people can't accept the truth of constitutional liberty and restriction. This epilogue just gets on into the idea that what that founding generation looked at is what they called as manners, and that these manners weren't about etiquette, that what they looked at was the habits and moral tastes of a people who are about to take a new turn in their career of self-government. When I talked to the young people last night, and we're not going to have the opportunity to get into the remainder of this epilogue, so as you see, it is referenced in your notes. There's a link to it in the digital form of the Founders Constitution, is that this is supposed to be our careers. It's not the career of being an electrician. It's not the career of being a teacher. It's not the career of being a programmer. It's not the career of being a gamer. It's not the career of being a politician. It's not the career of being a bureaucrat. It is the career of self-government. And that is a biblical career first and foremost. If you don't have the moral adeptness to take and understand how to govern yourself, you're never going to understand the habits and the moral tastes that it takes to what? Govern the country. You know, John Adams, Madison, and others said that this Constitution is what? Only for a moral and virtuous people. And that is exactly what the founders intended, that we would be a moral and virtuous people, that you could self-govern. But we don't. We don't have that. And that's where the churches, the John MacArthurs and the Doug Wilsons and those like them, heavy emphasis on like them, are the ones that will bring forward a moral and virtuous people. Ladies and gentlemen, all I can do is ask you to go to the references at samueladamsreturns.net, read these attachments, read these references, because this is what will help you self govern in this time of troubles that we're having with dictatorship coming strongly upon us. So come on back next week. Sam Adams knew these principles as well did those anti federalists. See you again, and thanks for being here.